Of the Five College Women's Studies Research Center, and I'm delighted that you are here despite Mountain Day at Smith College, but it looks like you turned out anyway, at least those of you from Smith, so thank you very much. It's a genuine pleasure and delight to inaugurate our annual focus at the center this year, which is New Media in Feminist Scholarship, Teaching, and Activism. And I invite you to check out our events on our website. There's also a brochure at the back of the room that you can pick up on your way out. We have a series of public colloquia, public conversations, seminars, screenings around our theme this year. And I also wanted to draw your attention to another event happening on October 5th, which is a symposium on intersex, which has been organized by Angie Willie. So if you have any questions about that, you can ask her. I also wanted to take a moment to welcome the research associates for 2012-2013 at the center. Instead of, maybe they can just wave at this point so you can see who they are. We have Eve and Suzanne and Sophie and Salome and Maria and Fungai and who else? Okay, but I invite you to meet them and talk with them. We're delighted they are here bringing their knowledge both in the field and in their research on new media and digital technologies. And finally, I have the pleasure of thanking the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who, through the sponsorship of the Five College Incorporated Digital Humanities Initiative, is supporting this event and the series of events this year, and also a number of learning communities dedicated to developing courses and building networks that incorporate new media, social justice, digital feminisms, food, all kinds of topics, and I invite you again to check out our website to learn more about these exciting initiatives. And I also would like to thank Lisa Armstrong from Smith College, who organized this event and is one of the directors of our Digital Humanities Grant at the center. And I'd like to thank Elizabeth Lehman over here in the blue shirt, who is the assistant director at the center and who gets us where we need to be, and she does a lot of work behind the scenes and on the scenes, so thank you, Elizabeth. And I'd also like to thank Rachel Siegel, who is the administrative assistant at the Smith Women and Gender, no, Study for Women and Gender. Every institution has a different title, so it's very hard to learn. And finally, I'm happy to turn the floor over to Lisa, who will be introducing our distinguished guests and speakers, Professor Anna Everett and Professor Jessie Daniels, who have already been hard at work. They visited a class at the University of Massachusetts and will be continuing with the faculty seminar tomorrow, so no rest for the weary. But we're very happy that you are here.
I'm in the program for the study of women and gender, and I am really pleased that this all came together today after a lot of conversations and planning and talks, and that you so generously gave us your time in what I know is a busy fall for you both. So today we have two speakers. Professor Anna Everett is a professor of film, television, and new media studies, and the acting associate vice chancellor for diversity, equity, and academic policy at the University of California in Santa Barbara. She's also a prolific writer. She's provided us with tools to make more meaningfully and more deeply intersectional our conversations about new media, from gaming to hacktivism, from political and social media to more democratized digital communities. She has written numerous books, including, and here we go, Returning the Gaze, A Genealogy of Black Film Criticism, 1909 to 1949. The Revolution Will Be Digitized, Afrocentricity and the Digital Public Sphere, and Afrogeeks, Beyond the Digital Divide with Amber Wallace. and Digital Diaspora, A Race for Cyberspace. And this is just a few of her books. Her most recent book publication is the edited volume, Pretty People, Film Stars of the 1990s. In one of her most celebrated books, Digital Diaspora, Professor Everett contests the troublingly racialized assumptions about who will use the internet, and more subtly, who can use the internet, when African Americans and Africans are left out of examinations of the digital diaspora. In contrast, Professor Everett's work traces the future-thinking excitement among early Black participants in the digital revolution as trailblazers who sought to challenge and reimagine constructs and lived realities of race and gender as well as class. All of her work opens new ways to think about how the contradictory material investments of gender and race live and breathe on the internet. In her words, in order to enable us to envision how the revolution will be digitized. We also have today Professor Jessie Daniels. She is a professor of CUNY School of Public Health at Hunter College and CUNY Graduate Center. She has written about organized white supremacy online and in other media forms in the United States. In her book called White Lies, Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality in White Supremacist Discourse, as well as her book Cyber Racism. Her next book, which has a great title, Google Bombs, AstroTurf, and Cloaked Sites, takes a look at propaganda in the digital era. It's due very soon from Routledge, in 2013 from Routledge. She's also at work on an edited book project that examines feminism, race, and blogging. Jessie Daniels examines another set of assumptions around the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness in white supremacist internet sites. She warns us that clunky websites with unwieldy menus or unattractive layouts should not lull us into dismissing these websites as powerful sites to disseminate white supremacist ideologies and build white supremacist groups' membership. As she remarks about one white supremacist website, is that it is one good graphic designer away from a much more pernicious web presence. What I'm excited about is bringing both of these wonderful thinkers and challenging writers and practitioners in new media, is bringing them together in the conversation that we're planning for today. And what they share is a keen eye for those discursive forms of potentially liberatory as well as oppressive ideologies in new media, rather than falling simply on one side or the other of a celebration or a denigration. What they allow us to think about is the complexities, the possibilities, as well as some of the dangers. And also a focused attention to democracy and how democracy is shaped by new media and the internet. They share a commitment to how we educate ourselves about how we consume and digest new media forms, and how a renewed critical lens can open up public cultures of debate and contestation. It is my great pleasure to bring them here today, both for their individual contributions to the field, but also for what they can bring in their conversation with each other for us. Our conversation today will begin with opening remarks of both of our speakers. We'll then give them time to respond to each other, and then we'll have time to talk together. And in order to help us do this smoothly and seamlessly, Professor Trey Andrea Russworm will moderate the process. Professor Russworm is an assistant professor of English at UMass, and she teaches classes in American Studies, African American Studies, and Cinema and Media Studies, including video game theory and culture. She is currently writing a book about the civil rights era popularization of the psychoanalysis of race. She has published articles and book chapters on television, video games, and new media, and is teaching courses at this very moment on these topics. So please join me in welcoming Professor Everett first, and then Professor Daniels, and first of all, Trey Andrea Russworm. Thank you so much.
a real pleasure to be here, I have to say. Although I'm kind of panicking a little bit because I heard they're going to say opening remarks and then we're going to have a moderated discussion, and I actually have like a formal paper. So I'm going to try my best to get it all in and in such a way that it doesn't impinge on your time. So I was told I have 20 minutes, but it took 10 minutes to get set up, so we'll see. All right, so first of all, I want to thank the ones who brung me. And just say that, first of all, the 5 College Women's Studies Research Center organizers, I want to thank you all formally: Karen Remler, Elizabeth Lehman, Elizabeth Armstrong, and Jen Malakowski, and of course, Andrea Russworm, who is a very dear friend, and we go way back, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that. And also anybody else who I left out, please, I thank you for this wonderful invitation, and I thank all of you, of course, for coming. And so my talk title is Yack the Hack, Women's Hacktivism in Digital Culture. My talk derives from concerns I have developed as a result of participating in some digital humanities, or DH circles, where debates about yakking versus hacking tend to position those interested in critical discourse analysis of digital technologies in society and culture in opposition to those interested in processes and code structures of digital technologies. The debates often center on whether or not yakking is as effective as hacking to leverage new media discourse production in the humanities, outside of some de rigueur, read, tired, or lame identity politics, because we're so over that, right? In such contested DH conversations, it seems that hacking or producing new media objects and tech systems, for example, courses based in Second Life, creating digital portals, digital archives in Creative Commons, etc., are privileged over mere yakking about the persistence of race, gender, sexuality, and class analyses in digital cultures. But that is a whole nother matter, and I am doing some work on that, which is too laborious to go through right now. But these issues do inform the comments that I will be making today. So this was supposed to be a 3-part talk, and it's a composite of some of the work that I've been doing. I'm working on a book on the media coverage of President Obama, and I'm looking at youth hacktivism and new media, and I'm also working on an essay on race and gaming and youth culture. So what I want to do is kind of start with some images to ground some of the remarks that I'll make. I'm going to begin with a discourse from a male feminist, and if you guys don't know Jay Smooth, I think some of you probably know him, right? How many of you know Jay Smooth's work? Okay. I think he's really someone who has his pulse on what's happening in digital culture around these questions. One of the things that he's responding to is this woman who started a blog and has been attacked because it's about women in gaming, and I want to play his response to some of the outrageous attacks she's been experiencing.
So a couple of weeks ago I made a video about how sometimes internet trolls are just sad and annoying, and other times internet trolls are still sad but also genuinely destructive and dangerous. And this week we've had a great example of that second type of trolling with the sexist gamer dude attack on Anita Sarkeesian. Anita does a web video series named Feminist Frequency, which if you watch my stuff you should already be watching hers. And recently she set up a Kickstarter page for a new project looking at the representation of women in video games. And after the Kickstarter page went up, a whole bunch of gamer dudes decided, even though they haven't heard what her opinion is yet, that the mere idea of this woman presuming to form an opinion about them at some point in the future was so frightening that they had to organize a scorched earth campaign of harassment and bullying against her. And Anita has handled the whole situation incredibly well, and her project is wound up getting more support and funding than ever. So in this instance, the private army of sexist dudes has only succeeded in proving proving her right and making her stronger. But it's still been an intensely ugly spectacle. It raises a whole lot of questions about why this happens so often and why so many dudes think it's okay to persecute and harass and abuse women online. A lot of these dudes, if you challenge them, will tell you that they don't have any real feelings about this and they're just trolling for the fun of it. That they don't really hate women, they just think it's funny to treat women as if they hate them. And that, I mean, first of all, you're lying to yourself. There's clearly more to it than that. And second of all, that doesn't make it any better. Only somebody who hates women and sees them as less than human would even think that's a meaningful distinction. And I don't know what I could say that would get through to someone who's so invested in detaching from their own humanity, so I'm just going to think about that and come back to it. And for now, I'm just going to say to everyone else, and especially my fellow dudes, that when you see something like that going on, you, and by you I mean we, have an obligation to speak out against it more often. It's really not cool for us to just shrug our shoulders and say that's just 4chan being 4chan. And it's really not okay for you to jump into somebody's discussion of this harassment and derail it with a bunch of comments about, well, sure, harassment is bad, but men are discriminated against too. Feminists are always making something out of nothing and blah, 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 blah. No, man, now is not the time for that. If you need to have that debate, there are plenty of other times for it. If you need to show off your debating skills and try to make fetch happen with the misandry thing, there's plenty of other times for that. If you want to debate Anita Sarkeesian's debates of video game culture, there's plenty of times for that. Like, for example, after she makes the critiques. But none of that stuff is the issue right now. The issue right now is the bullying and abuse and harassment that she's facing. And you should recognize that that harassment is wrong, and that's what matters right now, regardless of your political position on misandry and men's rights and blah, 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 blah. This kind of abuse and harassment matters, and when it happens in our corner of the internet, we need to treat it like it matters. We need to speak up and let them know that we're not impressed by how edgy and fearless they are, that it's pathetic that they really still think that sandwich joke is funny, that when you bully and harass a woman for speaking her mind, all you do is show us that you're afraid of that woman's voice and you don't think you can beat her intellectually without using a cheat code. No matter what scene on the internet is your scene, if you are a dude on the internet and you see other dudes in your scene harassing women or transgender people or anyone else who's outside of our little privileged corner of the gender spectrum, we need to speak up. We need to treat this like it matters. We need to add some extra humanity into our scene to counteract their detachment from their humanity.
Okay, and just a few images then to show you a little bit of the history of some of the images that I'm working with. So one of the things that I've done is a kind of tally of the social media and the ways in which women and underrepresented communities have used the web for their social change agendas. And the Million Woman March, the Million Mom March are really essential as these originary moments. And you can see the others there. This is the Million Woman March, and it was really important in Philadelphia. They had a major impact. This is the Million Mom March that organized around violence and drinking while driving and children. And this is the protest against the Senator Sensenbrenner's anti-immigration reform and the Gina 6 controversy around legal punishment for underage minority males. And this is in Tunisia, the Jasmine Revolution. But again, just sort of showing you some images that will ground some of the comments that I want to make. Now, of course, this is prior to what's been happening of late, where I thought it was really interesting how Egypt was supporting the Wisconsin strikers a few months back, and how times change, at any rate. So I just wanted to kind of give you these images to bear in mind as we go through some of the more formal aspects of the talk. And again, what was going on here was this idea that youth were leading the traditional civil rights leaders to the online agora. And then there's a huge discussion about Black Twitter and what it means. And so that's what I wanted to begin with. Great. Okay, so on part one, on background, digital media paradigms, shifting ways and means. The internet revolution, Web 2.0 technologies, with their explosion of online participatory cultures and the advent of specific social media platforms, including MySpace, now largely superseded, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, Flickr, Vimeo, and others, have laid the groundwork for rapid transformational social change, arguably unmatched by previous media epochs. Powering this emergence of what Jan van Dijk and Manuel Castells, among others, have dubbed early on the networked society. Behind this are a cadre of tech-savvy youths of diverse racial, gender, and ethnic backgrounds who were born digital. And Mark Prensky calls these digital natives as opposed to digital immigrants. In the decades since their unveiling, social media technologies have enabled these tech-toting youths to reimagine and repurpose traditional communications rules of engagement in our nation's civil society. With the events leading up to the Jasmine Revolution, what we in the West terms the Arab Spring, the London riots, Occupy Wall Street, and most recently Occupy Sanford, Florida, for the justice for Trayvon Martin, and certainly the furor over the so-called war on women in electoral politics today, we can see the formidable global impact of our changed media environment. At the same time, innovations in mobile telephony have transformed cell phones from once rarefied status devices of the economic elites to pervasive and essential must-have everyday devices for the masses. Touting such powerful interactive applications and features such as web access, SMS and text messaging, online video conferencing, networked mobile gaming, and ubiquitous computing, it becomes evident why the nation is enthralled with the new digital tools, killer apps, and smart toolkits of our networked information society. Among the most captivating and significant development of the 2.0 information order and the 3 and 4G convergence cultures is the enthusiastic embrace of social media by the nation's youth and tech-obsessed others to effect both serious and frivolous and numerous tech-driven goals in between. There has emerged, then, a powerful and diverse group of social media thought leaders and enthusiasts that I call the Where You At generation. The Where You At generation constitutes groups of racially, ethnically, and gender diverse communities of practice, to use Etienne Wenger's useful terminology. For cognitive anthropologist Wenger, it is important to recognize that communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something that they do, and they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly, end quote. I am more concerned right now with some specific instances of what the Where You At generation have been up to in recent years, particularly since they catapulted Senator Obama to the presidency in 2008. And that sparks our concern with the experiences of individuals and collectives imbricated in what I am calling the gendered hacktivist practices. And let me just explain briefly this Where You At generation. A few years ago, I was coming out of an evening class, and as I was filing out of my class, I noticed that some other a whole group of students were coming out of another class, and they all had the clam phones at that time. So they flipped open their phones simultaneously, and the blue lights were illuminating their faces, and it looked like fireflies of my youth in the dark, right? And so one of the things I noticed was that most kids have cell phones, and they've had them for quite a while, but what struck me is how the way they communicate with them. They'll say, like, where you at? It's not hello. It's not what's up, it's where you at. And one of the things that I realized is that this mode of address not only addresses this kind of physical locality of where you at, but also where you at politically, because it was through these cell phones and social media that these youths have transformed much of our political engagement and the rules of engagement with politics today. So that's, I'm using that term as a sort of parallel to Mark Prensky's notion of the digital native. Okay, so that's the Where You At generation. So, so one of the things that's happening here is that there are these unanticipated consequences that have occurred as a result of this media and media paradigm shift. So unanticipated consequences are manifest in the phenomenal interventions women make in largely masculinized contemporary digital cultures, especially in political activism, online and networked gaming, social media communities, and academia. The increasing pervasiveness of digital media and their user-generated content byproducts has empowered women to be effective change agents in our rapidly congealing digital age. From Black Geeks Online, the Million Woman March movement, the Huffington Post, the Black Twitter, for example, to the Essence of Truth YouTube channel, women deploy these powerful modes of interactive digital technologies not only to speak truth to power, but to leverage digital media power to promote democratizing forms of cultural productions and advocate for gender-based social change. Now, the second part is digital women, social media, and Black Twitter. What's up with that? Okay. Regarding Black Twitter and its significance, let me address one controversial instance of a Black woman's concerns about the power of words in the digital agora that is Twitter. Her pioneering tweet presumably generated a firestorm that reached some dominant online media sources. Briefly, a huge debate around Black Twitter came to a fever pitch when Slate.com writer Roran Manju wrote the provocative essay, quote, How Black People Use Twitter, the latest research on race and microblogging, and that was published on August 10, 2010. It generated a subcategory of expository writing in the mainstream and Black blogospheres about Blacks on Twitter. Essentially, after completing some research and conducting interviews with members of the Black Digerati, Manju followed the conversation of a leading topic trending on Twitter, displaying the hashtag words that lead to trouble. Ostensibly initiated by a young African-American woman in Hollywood, which he claims was, quote, pushed to a wider audience by a Black woman in South Africa, and then pushed over the top by thousands of contributions from users who appear to be Black teenagers all over the United States, end quote. In trying to understand many people's and his own obsession with late-night Black people Twitter, Manju reveals one of the key informants on Black culture and what they've had to say about specifically how Black young people use Twitter differently from everyone else on the service. And so one of the arguments that he makes is that there's this sense that Black people use Twitter because it approximates the dozens, this kind of Black call and response play that Black people use, and that it's these short, succinct kind of modes of discourse, and that they retweet one another often. And so they have been able to dominate much of the Twitter sphere, and that they are very much in a major mode of discourse, and it becomes something really important for fun, for trivialities, as well as some serious social and political organizing. And Twitter is one of those places that if you are faint of heart, you don't want to go there, Black Twitter. So one of the things that is interesting to me is how there is this unestimated amount of power and activity that's going on with Blacks and Twitter, and particularly young people. So I'm not quite sure that I buy that new version of the dozens, but it is an interesting way to think about what's there. So part 3 is finally, Black women are playable characters too, but guess what? All right, so one of the things that I wanted to show you is some of the ways in which the imagery of Black women is changing, but also a kind of historical look through gaming and what's happening online. An interesting trend in gaming is occurring. Black women, as well as other women of color, are now becoming must-play characters, or MPC, and playable characters, a PC, in particular game series and popular franchises. And this is unlike anything we've seen in previous eras. Among the game companies leading in this practice is Capcom, with its 2008 release of Resident Evil 5 that features one badass NPC of African descent, Shiva Alamar. Among some considerations of this presentation are those online debates about the confluence of race and gender in popular gaming. This includes Black and other women and girls of color as narrative agents in action-adventure shooter games, and the increasing presence of Black and other women of color in virtual gaming spaces, especially in discourses on Xbox Live and in machinima productions. Indices of these changing circumstances are websites, blogs, vlogs, wikis, YouTube, and Vimeo videos, among other online discursive platforms that engender powerful participatory gaming cultures of play and critique. Most famous early on were the vociferous commentary and condemnation appearing at GamePolitics.com, WallStreetJournal.com, BlackLook.org, the zombiefiles.com, and many, many others that highlighted the controversy that ensued when Capcom finally unveiled its Resident Evil 5 game trailer at the 2007 E3 convention. That Capcom was unprepared for the public reaction against its latest iteration of the lucrative Resident Evil franchise is interesting, if not surprising. After all, was not the company stepping out on the cutting edge of gaming's user base expansion with its development of a badass playable Black heroine capable of attracting a new gamer demographic, while offering something new to its primary Game Boy's user base? Apparently, no one accepted the company's scantily clad good Black babe heroine as a sufficient counterbalance to the horde of bad Black manji, the evil spirit boys in the jungle discourse of this game. Also of concern here is how contemporary game designers address charges of sexism and racism in the industry, especially following Capcom's reinvention of the Black heroine in Resident Evil 5. Now, not all commentary revolving around Capcom NPC Shiva Alamar was monolithic. One Black young woman in a resistant reading found the character a welcome addition. Writing under the pseudonym Midori, a name lifted from a video game character of the old PSX game Evil Zone, Midori is a self-identified 22-year-old African-American. She was ecstatic after learning of the character's creation and narrative centrality to the game. And she writes, quote, "I went to a video game site. I browsed games and decided to click on Resident Evil 5. Now, I don't play survival horror much. I get too scared. But Resident Evil is famous, so I thought I would just see what it is looking like. And oh my God, one of the main characters is a Black woman. Bold, 3 exclamation points. I know this might not seem exciting to some, but being a Black woman myself and a big fan of video games, I'm just stoked. We get no representation." End quote. As stoked as Midori was, she had not abandoned all her senses of critical distance regarding the representational economies at work in the character construct. She continues, and I quote, "Anyway, her name is Shiva Alamar, and she's absolutely gorgeous. I believe she's supposed to be from West Africa. She works for an organization in West Africa, and she even has a tattoo on her arm that says soldier in Swahili. Never mind that Swahili is spoken in East Africa, not West, where she's supposed to be from, laugh out loud. It's possible though, and I guess we can't expect too much, laugh out loud. The symbol part of the tattoos is from West Africa. One of my friends has that tattooed on his arm. See the tattoo in the last image? It means soldier. Isn't she stunning? It's about time a Black woman is one of the leads in a video game. First Obama, now Shiva. I don't know what to do with myself. Okay, so let me just show you a little bit of. So these are some of the video game characters over the years, and I'll just mention a little bit. What is useful about Midori's 209 post to her website that she calls the Diary of Midori is its tally of clearly delineated Black women playable characters in video games that total approximately 5 to 7. In addition to Shiva Alamar, the others she identifies are such precursors as Darcy Stern from the Urban Chaos action game, and with Stern imagined as a rival to Lara Croft in 1999 for the original PlayStation. So she was supposed to be, and this is, anyway, she's the one there, Darcy. Yeah, so she was supposed to be a rival to Lara Croft, but you can tell by the way she looks that wasn't going to happen in boy culture. Anyway, Lisa Hamilton, aka La Mariposa from the fighter games Dead or Alive, Fran, the non-human character from Final Fantasy, and Tanya from the Mortal Kombat brand. Like others online who interrogate the abysmal number of heroic Black women characters in gaming, I found vlogger Essence of Truth to be particularly compelling. Her YouTube channel is devoted to gaming, and she has upwards of 160 videos on her channel. While Essence of Truth, Midori, and the Angry Black Woman are serious about their online activism and participation in gaming's network cultures, business practices, and influential cultural capital, they do not seem to take themselves seriously as their affective labor and pleasure in being part of a web of social media communities or communities of practice gets expressed unequivocally. Moreover, they are not in lockstep, and it is not clear if their social networks are intertwined at all. How much time? 5 minutes? I'm sorry, or more? Okay, all right, so let me just show you to wrap it up. Right, wrap it up, right? So these are some casual games, and I wanted to show that even in casual games, we see black women represented and discussed. So this is Essence of Truth, and I'm hoping that I can just have you see a little bit of her comment about a new game.
Hey guys, I wanted to just come to you really quick, maybe the fastest video I've ever made. I'm watching the Sony press conference, E3 press conference, and if some of you didn't pick it up or you don't follow me on Twitter, then you missed out on what I was saying. If you hadn't noticed, first off, I want to thank Sony for listening. And you're probably wondering, Whitney, what the heck are you talking about? I want to thank Sony for listening. And watching my video that I made 2 years ago, the blogs I had written a year before that, and the blogs that I made last year talking about black women in gaming and, you know, how everybody has a hero, but we don't have a hero. You know, addressing people who had a problem with me bringing up this issue because it makes them feel uncomfortable talking about it. It makes them feel uncomfortable when somebody, especially if somebody of color brings up this situation, because in their minds they're thinking, well, you're pulling the race card, no matter which side it's coming from, black or white.
And let me just fast forward.
How, you know, everybody in the gaming world who is non-black has a hero. And those heroes are our heroes, my heroes. Obviously, I've gone through the list of how many of those guys and or females are my heroes. But I also mentioned in a video how, you know, black women, we also need our hero, someone that we can look up to and push forward and can be an elite, standing next to Nathan Drake, Lara Croft, you know, just all the greats.
And then
So afraid of putting our face on something, thinking that we might not sell. Well, Sony answered. You know, I've said a lot of mean things about Sony because they were kind of shady to me, but they redeemed themselves with me tonight with that. They really did. They gave exactly what I was asking for. And it was perfect. I couldn't have asked for anything better. She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect.
And who's perfect that she's talking about is the new Assassin's Creed character. And I just wanted to, and I'm done after this. Oh, I forgot. Shoot. Don't look. I'm not going to tell the truth anyway. But you have to be like a certain age, right? So you just like make up something. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the trailer and, you know, some of the images. Where is it? Oh. Well, I can't. Well, anyway, the main idea is that, you know, here's this woman who not only is a must-play character, but she is the star of the narrative, and it's coming out this October, and it's not for the main PlayStation or the Xbox, it's for the handheld. So there's something to be said there. Anyway, so the point is that black women are utilizing the web and social media to really address some of their concerns about what's occurring online and in media that they want to address, particularly in gaming, and that there is a major pushback going on that is something that we can be really quite proud of. So, and with that, I actually did have one other thing, just a couple. Okay, so I also wanted to mention The Adventures of Awkward Black Girl, which is a web series by Issa Rae, who has modeled it on Seinfeld and some of these other shows, and she's taken it to the web. She has a YouTube channel, and now she's picked up for a second year, and it's really, really popular. And then the Feminist Frequency is a very, very important blog that you should really check out, and we can maybe discuss some more. So thank you very much.
Where's my tech helper? I need the audio and the visual. Well, I'm rethinking that whole, oh, Anna, I'll go after you thing. That's, oh, come on. While we're getting this set up, I just want to say briefly before we do the official response that Professor Everett's work has been so crucial for mine and work that I've done after the stuff I'm going to talk about today. One of the things that Lisa didn't mention is that I do some work with LGBT homeless youth and in New York, and started doing that in about 2006, and had that same kind of moment of realization where you walk around and you see everybody with a mobile device. And Anna has a great line in one of her pieces. I think it's in Digital Diaspora or the article, where she refers to the digital divide as disabling rhetoric. And I often use that line when talking to people about the fact that all the LGBT homeless kids that I work with all have digital devices, and that it still surprises people even in 2012. I don't need the internet, actually. I just need audio and visual. I don't need any of this browser stuff. Thank you very much. Awesome. So today I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for everyone that invited me, and for Anna for mentioning me to come. I'd like to just say that I'm thrilled to be here to talk about some of this that's happening right now, even as the stuff that Anna was just talking about is happening as well. So the title of my talk today is Race, Racism, and Ways of Knowing in the Digital Era. And I really want to spend a little time today exploring with you how we come to know things that we know in the digital era. So let's get started. Oh, right. And speaking of Twitter, if you're on the Twitter machine, I'm very fond of it. Please find me at JessieNYC. And we can talk about Black Twitter, too. I think it's actually part of the reason I like it so much, is it's a good place to hang out. So just as a way of introduction, this is already obvious given what was just said, but race is happening online, and I actually see this as not a bad thing. Black Twitter is part of what's happening online around race. Blackplanet.com, many of you may know about this. Last I heard has about 17 million registered users. So a lot of people are using the internet to find community, and find community specifically around racial identity. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It's how we look for friends. It's how we look for people that we want to date or marry, if that's an option. But our way of thinking about the internet is really stuck in about 1994. And I realize that given probably the mean age in this room, 1994, many of you were in elementary school, you don't know what was going on in 1994, but I was a grown adult in 1994, as it turns out, and was watching television. And there was a commercial at the time that was very, very popular for a company that's since gone out of business called MCI, which used to sell people internet stuff, basically a connectivity to the internet. And they had an advertisement at that time that really sort of captures the way that we still think about the internet. So I'm going to play this short commercial. The commercial is only about 30 seconds. And then after it, I have created actually a short video that explains some of my work. And I'm going to talk about it after it, but this is about 5 minutes. So if all goes well here technically. And now I'd like to play that. Nope. Nope. Yes, I would like to play it, please. Okay, I have other ways to do this. Hold on.
People here communicate mind to mind.
There is no race. There are no genders.
There is no age.
No age.
There are no infirmities.
There are only minds.
Only minds.
Utopia?
No.
No. The internet. Where minds, doors, and lives open up.
Is this a great time or what?
about that. So part of what I argue in my work is that sorry. I know there's a way to get to current screen, but I just missed that. Part of what I argue in my work is that there's a political struggle now over knowledge, and part of the way that that's working is through these cloak sites. So in case it went by too quickly, cloak sites are sites that disguise their intent by concealing authorship, and there are lots of kinds of these. In cyber racism, I focus primarily on the ones that are white supremacists, but I've done other writing where I talk about other kinds of them, and there are ones that talk about reproductive health. One that I'm looking at now looks at purports to say that there's something called post-abortion syndrome, but it's really sort of an online version of crisis counseling center for pregnancy, right? So there are ways in which debates about reproductive health are also getting implicated in this political struggle over knowledge. And we see that as well in the current political debate, right? The fact checkers and the whole controversy around fact checkers and what's the truth and what's meaningful, and that idea is, I think, connected to these epistemological struggles over what is the truth. It's not that white supremacists are going to recruit us, are going to lure us in on the internet. It's that our ways of knowing are shifting, especially around racism and civil rights, as people who were involved in that movement die and grow older, people who witnessed it, people who experienced it even in a mediated form are getting older and no longer with us. The civil rights movement and that struggle becomes something that we learn about by going on the internet to learn about it, right? So that raises all these really interesting questions that I started exploring in my research about in the late 1990s. And at that time, we were still doing this thing where we told people in kind of the internet literacy, the best practices at the time around internet literacy was to look at the URL, right? And if you're talking about a cloak site, the URL is part of the deception, right? That very universal resource locator, that address is part of the deception. So I wanted to interview young people and ask them about how they were making sense out of these. And I did interviews. I can talk more about the methodology some other time, but I did interviews where I basically sat with young people as they were 15 to 19 years old, and I sat with them as they surfed the internet. And after this was one of the results, I asked a young person, so what do you think of that site, just looking at it from the Google page? And she said, yeah, because the site itself says martinlutherking.org, so I guess they're dedicated to that, right? So she was absolutely taken in by the URL and said that must be part of what makes it okay. What we know is that the Martin Luther King's, the cloak site comes up almost always on the first page of Google search results, and it comes up usually third or fourth. And so I asked the young people in my study, I asked, so what does that mean to you that it's on the first page? Like, what's your perception of what's happening there? And I was shocked to learn that they thought really that there was someone at Google headquarters sort of vetting the results on that page. It doesn't quite work that way. This is a quote from one of the young people in my study. Says, I actually have never, I think, like gone to the third page or the second page. I just stop at the first page because, I mean, there must be a reason why everything's on the first page and the rest of the stuff is later. We talked later after the interview, and I said, yeah, there is a reason. It's a Google algorithm, which is different than somebody actually reading each one of the sites and making sense of it or ranking it in some way. Then I asked people to look at a cloaked site and what I refer to as a legitimate site, an actual site dedicated to the civil rights movement. This is one of the pairs that I asked them to look at. This is the martinlutherking.org site, the cloaked site I showed you. And then this is the King Center site that was actually started by Coretta Scott King. And then the other two, the one you saw in that brief video clip is the American Civil Rights Review, which has the piece about high self-esteem among slaves. And then next to it is the Library of Congress site, Voices of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Review comes up again on the first page of the Google results. If you just search for American Civil Rights and Review, it comes up first. As Lisa mentioned actually in the introductory remarks, graphic design was something that came up a lot in the conversation with young people in my study. It's both good and bad news, right? There's very good news here. One is that young people looked at this graphic design and they immediately spotted it as amateurish, right? Like this one young person said, well, it just looks like some individual, created. It doesn't look very professional, right? That's very good news that people are getting this new kind of digital literacy that incorporates graphic design, that says, oh, look, this font looks wrong, this color looks wrong, this doesn't work. But the bad news, of course, is that's so easily fixable, right? You can actually buy websites now for $49 or something that look more professional than these, and so the white supremacists really are, as Lisa mentioned, one good graphic designer away from a much more pernicious presence on the web. I also found that photographs were a way that the young people in my study looked for evidence. And that was, in a way, a little surprising to me at the time, because trained as a sociologist, that's not what we're trained to look for as truth, but this was certainly important to young people I talked to. It was also important to me, important to young people because they really saw it as a window on the truth, which I found ironic for young people who grew up in the digital age. What William Mitchell has suggested is a post-photographic era, right, where every photograph can be altered. But there was none of that skepticism among them about the visual image. One said, this site looks good. I mean, it has a lot of pictures and photos, so you can see for yourself what happened. So for them, it was a way in which it seemed unmediated if there was a photograph. And conversely, and this is where my academic colleagues usually fall out in my presentation, they disregarded sites that they said were too wordy, that is, had lots of text and no words on them. And you can see this is actually a site from the Louisiana State University Library. So this is what we as traditional academics would say has been vetted as a good source, as a legitimate site. But one of my participants said, well, you know, this site, it's awfully wordy. I probably wouldn't use this one if I were going to do research. In addition, when looking at what I would refer to as legitimate civil rights sites, a lot of the young people in my research referred to those as biased. They referred to these as biased and therefore not useful to them in their research. So one young person said, well, you know, in looking at this site, it appears to be created by his widow or his family, so it could be biased. And the problem here, there are a lot of problems here, but one of the problems, I think, obviously, is that the very thing that qualifies this site as a legitimate civil rights site, that is its connection to Coretta Scott King and living witnesses at the time of the civil rights movement, this young person used as a disqualifier, right? And you see the extension of this when I asked them to look at that page about slavery. One young person in the study said, reading the page about slavery, well, I mean, I don't think I would disagree with it necessarily, and it goes on about how slavery was not that bad. I'm sure there were some slaves that were treated well, so I can understand their point of view. There's always two sides to everything. And I think that if you take that quote from her, right, this idea of slavery as having two sides to everything, we really have taken an unfortunate postmodern turn where everything is relative. And what this white supremacist has done very cleverly is to link to the Library of Congress site and WPA recordings or transcripts of text from former slaves who were recorded after the end of the Civil War, and put this sort of frame around it that suggests multiculturalism, that suggests an embrace of diversity. Forgotten Black Voices is the title of the page. But what I want to suggest is that what I found that was encouraging from these young people is that those who had a kind of critical race consciousness from other sources, right, that they had either from their own lived experience of racism or from reading more critical text outside of what they were reading on the web, were able to assess these cloaked websites beyond the graphic design. So there was one young woman who sounds like, you know, it sounds like slaves were mistreated, but it says sometimes, and that just throws me off because I think, yes, slaves were mistreated all the time, and then it says sometimes, so I wouldn't use it, right? So she's bringing in another kind of literacy that is a racial literacy about what's going on in these sites. So I just want to close by talking about how this is relevant for kind of broader context. You may have heard of Wikipedia. And there's been a lot of talk about Wikipedia. Academics were originally very upset about Wikipedia and its presence in our lives, and should we trust it, and is this a reliable source of information? And, you know, come 15 years later, it looks like, well, you know what, Wikipedia is about as reliable as Encyclopedia Britannica, and oh, right, Encyclopedia Britannica went out of business. So we're all relying on Wikipedia to a certain extent, but I don't know if you've ever gone behind the scenes at Wikipedia. How many people here have ever edited a page on Wikipedia? That's pretty good. It's better than most places I go. Usually there's one hand. So that was about let's say 25% of the audience, being generous. What's going on behind the scenes at Wikipedia is a real political struggle over knowledge. So one of the things we know is that Wikipedia is mainly edited by men. It's not unlike video gaming in that way. And there's also a political struggle going on over racial knowledge behind the scenes at Wikipedia. So some of the people that I study, white supremacists at one site, American Renaissance, have a very specific strategy telling their members to go to Wikipedia and edit pages so that it reflects their version of knowledge and truth and the facts, right? And then on the left, you have other people. This is from Restructure, which is a blog in Canada. This is from 2009, saying that we have to, on the left, have to take up a kind of activism 2.0 to fight racism by editing Wikipedia, right? So both these forces are going at Wikipedia, and what I consider to be really where the action is in some ways online now, this struggle over knowledge, which you see reverberating out in the political, mainstream political discourse in the presidential election now over fact checkers and that sort of thing, right? So it's this political struggle over knowledge. Just to reiterate again, it's not that we're going to be recruited into white supremacy, it's what we know. The ground beneath us really is shifting in a way in this new digital era. So I'll just close by saying why I think it matters. Part of why I think it matters is that the internet is changing us. Not only are we changing because of what's online, but the internet is changing the way that we come to know things, the way that we experience both race and racism. People talk about coming to terms with or learning about their racial identity online, and people also talk about experiencing racism or participating in racism online. How we acquire knowledge about race and racism is changing. So I would argue that we need not just a literacy about the internet, which is a very 1994 conceptualization, but we also need real critical thinking about the internet, what Ernest Hemingway originally called bullshit detection, and my friend Howard Rheingold has readapted for the internet era. So we really need this skill now to be able to see when someone's lying to us. And in addition, what is not getting talked about in sort of the mainstream internet scholarship is we need real literacy about race and racism. There's still a kind of naivete in sort of mainstream internet studies around race and racism that's really wedded in some ways to that 1994 commercial. Thanks very much, and find me on Twitter.
All right, so I don't know if there's, I mean, I have questions and I'm sure our audience members have questions, but part of this format is to give you a chance to sort of engage each other a little too. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to say right off the bat that sort of links your two presentations, and Anna and you listening to Jesse and Jesse listening to Anna, but we'd like to give you that opportunity before we turn and open the floor, but just maybe some sort of brief reactions or thoughts or, you know, reflections that you have on each other's work.
Well, I'd just like to say, thank you. I'd just like to say that I really enjoyed some of the ways in which you bring some of that Yacktivism and hacktivism together in a productive conversation, particularly when you were talking about the algorithms and some of the ways in which, you know, Wikipedia, for example, does kind of codify issues of race and how that political struggle is occurring. I also was struck by some of the ways in which, once you think about it, these arbiters of the media, the new media environment and landscape, and some of these powerful search engines who help to construct knowledge, do have so much in common when you think about Wikipedia and, you know, the kind of male domain and video games, and how there is just this kind of structure of power and privilege, and I think that if we don't teach our kids and also ourselves to be on the lookout for some of those subtle cues, the ways in which race and racism, get codified or cloaked, that we can also be deceived. And so I think it is kind of exciting the way you went back and sort of pulled out some of those earlier examples, like the MCI commercial, and that whole idea of of utopia and how we were so excited. I do, however, I'm not quite sure that there is as much a naivete as there is, something that George Lipsitz called the possessive investment in whiteness, and there's a desire not to give up, some of that white privilege, right? And so I'm a little, I'm not that willing to say there's kind of stuck in a time warp or mind warp, as President Obama says, but that there is also some aspect of preserving white privilege and white power and discourses of difference and otherness. But I was really struck by some of the comments that the students made, and I thought you captured a lot of some of the things that we need to be aware of these days when we meet our students who we feel are so capable in utilizing technology, and we were having a conversation about this earlier today. That, I have this idea about a partnership with students. If I don't know a particular software, I'm like, come in and show me this, right? And then I'm going to teach you something. So it's much more of a partnership, and I don't mind that. I don't feel like I'm giving over authority and power by recognizing that. But on the other hand, I do like the way of saying, that's totally wrong. There's some things you just have to call out for what they are. And so it is important to have those kinds of exchanges. So I really appreciated that part of your.
Thanks. Yeah, a lot of this research grew out of classroom interactions with students. So for the place I actually first came across the MLK site was a student drew it up in a class, in a lab. Yeah. And the same with, if you have a chance, go later to teenbreaks.com is the reproductive health site that I was mentioning. And that was also a student presentation talking about, she was going to do her presentation at the end of our class on post-abortion syndrome. And I was like, sorry, stop the class. Let's talk about this. Anyway. So I have a question for you, Anna, and that is, as I was saying at the beginning, your work, especially this kind of notion of, the digital divide as a disabling rhetoric has been so important, and I just wish that you would talk a little bit more about Black women specifically using the web to push back and resist as a particular social location, and kind of connect that to the earlier movements. You went by really quickly the earlier movements, and just if you would say a little bit more about that, it would be great.
But I talked a long time. That wasn't very long, Jesse. That's like back to you, right? Well, I mean, one of the things that I find really exciting about the ways in which communities of color and women in particular have utilized the web is that they have taken these skills, these secretarial skills earlier on, and really transformed them into a kind of power and a set of skills that have enabled them to speak truth to power, as I said. But on the other hand, that have also allowed them to be in dialogue with each other. And so, here's this skill that was thought of as, kind of a lowly skill, that they really were at the forefront of a lot of this digital activism. And so I find it really important to tell those stories. And I also tell the story about how Black youth are positioned as poster children for the digital divide and outside the information economy. But actually, when you think about it, Black youth especially have been at the leading edge of some of these technological discussions. And then I think about how earlier on, like you were talking about the 90s, when pagers were mostly used by doctors in the mainstream society, and for a lot of the, underworld characters, shall we say, they had their, they were ready, they were early adopters of the pagers, for whatever nefarious dealings, but they were technologically savvy. And, so there's this kind of mythology around, Blackness and underrepresented communities and poor communities as being, somehow technologically behind, and any investment in them is just throwing money away, and so that becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. And some of the exciting things that's going on online with women and their YouTube channels. I mean, they're doing everything. Like, they have these channels devoted to black hair. Now, black women in hair is this whole sort of historical thing, right? That's tied up in Western notions of beauty and all this kind of stuff. But there are these sites where these women have these years of I had the Brazilian blowout and it messed up my hair, and they're showing you how to do it. So there's a kind of DIY, do it yourself, ethos that they're teaching each other and just having their own conversations, and so it's really interesting when you look past some of the stereotypes, and as you were talking about the way race kind of limits some of our abilities to see some of the realities.
One more question, real quick. So I love the Jay Smooth clip that you showed. I hadn't seen that before, but I just wonder if you or anybody else actually knows of anybody that's done that around racist comments online, because I did another piece recently of looking at racist comments online, and they're just really, if you've been to an online site, they're just horrible. And I haven't seen anybody really speaking out on that, so I just wondered if you knew.
And then I'm back at you with a question here. He has a post on just about everything, because he's one of these vloggers who really has now been showing up on MSNBC and other places. So he's really getting some attention because he's a thoughtful person, and he utilizes the technology to both poke fun at some of our foibles and some of the things that we do as a wired society and culture. And he has talked a lot about race. One of the things that's interesting to me about commentary on race is on the gaming forums and fora, where these discussions are awful. I mean, if somebody brings up race in a video game, there's this pushback that's absolutely incredible. It's what are you talking about? You're just making this up. Nobody cares about race. We don't deal with race anymore. And it's your problem, and you're the one making it an issue when it's not an issue. And and it gets really vitriolic, and you get the N-word and all kinds of epithets thrown around, and the gender discussion is really horrible as well. So it's some awful things out there, and they show up in these circles that you don't anticipate. And but it is important to document them. But I sort of chose to look at some of the ways in which there is an empowerment going on, but at the same time a recognition that there's a persistence of racism and racist ideology. And so can I just have one more question before we open it up to her? Because she's not going to get away with just asking me questions. So one of the things that you were talking about with the kids was that you were saying that, let's say the idea of the funny racist website, that racist video that went viral at UCLA about Asians, and this whole idea that these sites look authentic. On the one hand, it was really kind of distressing to me, because I think there is this political discourse that you're talking about around this idea of equivalence, so that kids are being trained to think of only two sides as opposed to a multitude and a polysemous view of any kind of idea or message. So as you were talking with these students and trying to get their input, did you feel like, on the one hand, you did say that the one girl was saying, well, slavery was bad. I don't think there's something good about it. Did you get a sense that, on the whole, that there is this willingness to engage critically outside of, let's say, an assignment, but just in terms of people's general use of online with these kids? Did you really? Because that was what was concerning to me, that that the literacy only goes so far.
Yeah, I think what was different about the one, it was just, it's a small sample, but it was one young woman who really kind of got it, was able to do that sort of critical thinking. And to me, and I've often wondered if I had a bigger sample, what it would look like in terms of age distribution, because I think of this as a later skill that young people gain later on. It's sort of like an 18, 19, 20-year-old skill. But when they're 15, 16, two sides, that's all we're doing, But thus endeth my knowledge of cognitive psychology. But what I saw was that there was a willingness to engage critically, but it didn't seem to me a background in really talking about power, because that's really what's missing is two sides, but one side has all the power and the other side has no power. So, right, so they were willing to go there. Yeah. But they were willing to go there, but it didn't seem to me that had been part of what they had been taught, that most of the young people that I talked to had been really told that the way that they evaluate information is by this kind of, well, understanding that there are two sides to everything. And that was a common theme that I saw again and again.
One final thing. You said that the photographs are really important in the way in which we are able to decipher kind of credibility online. But I wanted to mention one thing. You were saying that I can't remember which, was talking about we're in a post-photographic era. And so it's difficult to understand or to know for sure that what we're seeing is in fact not a manipulation. But photography has always really been manipulated. So I mean, I think it's always important to kind of remind people that there is no there is no era of kind of purity of of knowledge production around photography in that way. But at the same time, the level and the seamlessness of the manipulations today is what's different. It's just so seamless.
Okay. I have the pleasurable and challenging job of keeping us on time. But it's Mountain Day. I'm sure we have a lot of time, a lot of extra time, even those of us who don't have Mountain Day on our own campuses. So my question, I mean, I want to make sure we get a lot of people, as many people as possible, to ask their own questions. But my question in thinking about both of your presentations, because I think about the civil rights movement all day, I kept thinking that there's an opportunity for a question here about the civil rights era. And so really, it's sort of about the question in my mind is your notion of the viral civil rights movement and then your notion of kind of hacking civil rights knowledge and information and how those two things kind of relate to each other in this moment, given that we're in an election year. So I'm kind of wondering, I guess the question has something to do with, are there evident intersections and connections between this notion of the viral civil rights movement, right, and then this notion of hacking civil rights history and the Obamas? So I guess maybe we can kind of think about that a little. And then shoot out to the floor. But I like that. That seemed to gel well, thinking about civil rights of the 60s and the 70s, and then viral civil rights movement and those possibilities, and the fact that we're in a current election year now, and all of those evident possibilities for thinking about race and gender. So I don't know who wants to jump in.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. And one of the things that occurs to me is Hakeem Bey talks about the temporary autonomous zone, where you have these moments of power because there isn't the panopticon where society or the powers that be are paying attention, and so you're able to mobilize. And that was the case of the Million Woman March, because no one expected black women to have this facility and to bring 1 million plus people to Philadelphia, and and it really sort of transformed the way kind of real grassroots as opposed to AstroTurf roots. But people were able to utilize this technology in ways that are different from the mimeograph era of the 60s and 70s. So one of the things that I find interesting today is that I think the model now of the viral civil rights and the temporary autonomous zone is no longer there. We've moved past that because the model has been picked up by dominant hegemonic forces and media, right? So there is so the mainstream media were caught flat-footed initially, but they are ready now. They're all over it.
They have Twitter
accounts. And many of the right-wing media organizations are very adept with social media now, and they're pushing it and they're using it very, very effectively. And I think with some of the idea of the enthusiasm gap between the President Obama supporters who really catapulted him to power, there isn't the same kind of fervor and the use of the web as in 2008. So I think that there is a kind of leveling and a parity between the right and the left these days because the technology is so pervasive on both ends. So there may be some way in which we'll see some fallout. Thank you.
Yeah, Lisa mentioned my next book about AstroTurf and cloak sites, and really I see that the turn that I see now in terms of hacking civil rights is really, happening at the level of the Supreme Court and the Koch brothers. I mean, now it's this incredible money that's flowing into sort of corporate advertising, and if the white supremacists lack a good graphic designer, the Koch brothers don't. So they're really good at this, and people, God forgive me, and corporations like Monsanto, are expert at manipulating the web and the discourse that goes on through similar means. So, I mean, I think.
Okay. And we'd like to hear some questions from other folks. I mean, I'm sure I have more questions, and you both can ask each other questions. But we do want to get some other thoughts, questions in from all of you who are waiting so patiently. I guess I'll bring around the microphone. I feel like a talk show host.
Say your name and where you're from.
So I'm Jen, and this is, I think, more related to Jesse's talk, but I'd welcome takes from either of you. I was just wondering about what you make of the impact of Google's new personalization of search results. So Jesse, when you're saying this site comes up fourth, it might come up fourth for you, it might not come up fourth for me, it might not come up at all, page 10 for my neighbor next door. So how's this impacting the way we're using the web and the kind of in-depth literacy that you're talking about?
Yeah, the personalization is interesting, and it's a more recent change. So it was true when I did that, but it's not. It's sort of less true, and it's actually one of the things that Bing and other search engines they actually use to sort of sell their product, is to say you won't get these bad sites like that, So I think it actually makes it more complicated, I think, in terms of talking about internet literacy with young people or people who are naive to the web. That just what you said then. Like, I'm trying to imagine explaining that to my partner's mother. Like, okay, stay with me, like, this is going to be complicated, So I think it can be a really challenging thing to do, but I think that from my perspective, it makes the case even stronger for the racial internet literacy, right? That we have to have this other dialogue going on, that it's not enough just to talk about, well, how does Google work? Or how does Bing work, or how does a search engine work? We have to have this other dialogue going on to go along with that kind of internet literacy. So short answer is, wow, it's even more complicated now.
All right, more questions? Was there a hand back here?
Hi, I'm Emily Lordy from UMass, and I have a question for Professor Daniels. First of all, thank you both so much. Really fascinating talks. My question for you was, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what's at stake in the distinction that you made between recruitment and this thing about different ways of knowing. I can tell that that's important to your argument because you did mention it a few times, but what I was thinking was, well, it seems to me that for a student who's kind of on that fence, or in that maybe 15 to 16-year-old zone, and is thinking about there's two sides to every story, it seems like recruitment could really be a threat there, to find a well-designed sort of covered site. So I'm wondering what was at stake in your decision.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, and thanks for noticing that I highlighted that like 5 times. So there are a couple of things at stake, and one is there's a background in the sociology literature. My training's in sociology, and so there's a whole social movement literature. And so when sociologists talk about social movement organizations and recruitment into social movement organizations, they mean a really specific thing. Like there's a whole list of 5 or 6 things that you have to do to be counted as a social movement organization, SMO member, right? And so that's partly what I'm speaking to, is that notion in the sociological literature. But there's another notion in the kind of popular imagination, in which weirdly white supremacists and pedophiles sort of overlap in a way. That you're gonna, it's the same language we had around it's very 1994, the same language we had about the information superhighway, and it's a net, and you're gonna get caught in it, and it's this configuration of the web as this dangerous place where you could be recruited. And the fact is that people are not getting recruited at Stormfront, which is the avowed white supremacist site, has hundreds of thousands of members. The way people are going there is they're searching for that information. They're looking for racist content, and then they're spending time there, right? So there is a way in which they might be influenced by it, and their ways of knowing might be influenced, but they're not becoming, they don't click on Google and then end up in a hood and a robe the next day. So it's really that kind of facile notion of recruitment that I was trying to get at.
More questions? This is what Oprah felt like.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Henderson. I teach at UMass. And one of the great things about this whole series and your presentations is, I was careening toward middle age in 1994, and I come to find out about the things that I don't know and don't do, and it's immensely informative. And then as I hear conversations, sometimes participate in them, there's also this incredible sort of haunting presence of things that I do know. For example, the relationship between recruitment and the struggle over knowledge, which is not an internet-dependent relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always sort of shifting back and forth between what is distinctive under these circumstances and what is maybe amplified or rerouted, or new circuits are created for sort of fundamental social relations that have their analogies in lots of other media eras. And I'm not here, I'm absolutely au contraire, not here to say, oh, well, yeah, that could be said about radio, or, oh, well, that could be said about Gutenberg, or, oh, well, I mean, it's not that kind of rearguard refusal to imagine what's distinctive. It's this constant oscillation between what is rooted in social relations, what is distinctive about circuitry and forms of delivery, and what the influence of each on the other is. And I'm constantly trying to parse that as, and the recruitment versus knowledge production, it strikes me that they were, those are paired anxieties apart from the internet, and cloaked, and the idea that you would misrepresent your intentions in order to draw people is also, has a long history in social movement organizing. And so if I could, you strike me as perfect people, perfect scholars to comment on how to handle this oscillation between, sort of standing social relationships and anxieties and transformations, none of which is to diminish my appreciation for what you bring to a knowledge base. I mean, I don't have it.
I'm going to quickly respond and let Anna say some more, because I know she has more to say about this. But what I would say, you make excellent points, and I don't intend to suggest that this is all new in any way. And in the cyber racism book, I spend a lot more time sort of talking about kind of, especially around the cloak sites and the history of propaganda. And there was, even as late as World War II, there was talk about black, white, and gray propaganda, and I sort of take issue with those terms, but it was the same kind of thing. The idea of black propaganda, pardon the expression, but that's what it's called, was that people were disguising what they were doing, and this was part of what they did on radio and in print in World War II. So absolutely has this precursor, and I really like sociologist at Columbia University, Saskia Sassen, has this wonderful piece where she talks about how the digital and the material are imbricated, right, that they overlap in these important ways. And she's talking about it in terms of flows of capital. So that capital a lot of times now exists in kind of a digital universe. It doesn't exist in paper money, right? But it's imbricated with the paper, with the material. And it has these material implications, even though it exists in these kind of zeros and ones circuits. And then the other thing that I was going to say is that there are other people who are talking about augmented reality, sort of like that even though that it's wrong to even make the distinction between this happens online and this happens in the material world, that we're living in a space now where, I'm always connected to people I talk to on Twitter because I'm going to go look at my phone and see what they're saying about whatever's going on in the news today, right? That my reality is augmented in that way. So.
I was just going to say, the issue that you raise is really one that also revolves around this question of medium specificity and what is it that makes the internet and its discourses different from television, from print, from these others. And one of the things that I think it's important to bear in mind is that the web and the discourses on the internet are very much moored to and dependent on these earlier modes of discourses to make meaning and to make sense and to communicate. So that there is not so much that there is something new in new media, as much as there are new ways in which we engage and interact with that media, and so it kind of reminds me of when we think about the the network era, when you had ABC, CBS, NBC, and Metro Media, right? And there was you would get around the water cooler and people would talk about what was going on. So it really was mass media. Now we're hyper-fragmented. And so rather than having this kind of one-way media top-down information transfer, it's much more two-way and interactive. So what happens in that scenario then is that the ability to construct, as you were talking about, these separate facts, right, that are completely different from any kind of thing you can verify. But you find a group of people who share, you go searching for these cloak websites, or you go searching for racism, and then you insulate yourself to the other facts, right? So there's this way in which you can find these communities that you may not have been able to find if you were not in the South or if you were not in these other locations. So, it's this ability to be everywhere at once that is kind of what's changing the game and the paradigm shift. So I think by recognizing some of those new functionalities, I think that's where we see the major shifts and the power, the excitement, and also the potential dangers. Because when I think about the Arab Spring, I spent a lot of time in Tunisia. I've been there about eight times. I've been a Fulbright Senior Scholar there a couple times, and I love that place. And I was there at the American Embassy in October and then the Jasmine Revolution occurred that January, right? And there was no way that you could predict what was going to happen. And so one of the things that has resulted in the interim is that many of the folks who were a part of that were saying, there's this discourse in the West that it was Twitter and it was the new technologies that caused it, and they're not looking at the history of the kind of resistance and opposition to the dictatorships. And so it's just that those technologies came together at the moment that people were able to communicate and do things that the technology helped to facilitate. It didn't cause or it didn't lead. So some of the critique in Tunisia and elsewhere and among scholars was that once again it takes the agency from the folks who are actually doing their own liberation and putting it on the technology and removing their sense of commitment. So you're absolutely right in that there are these histories and these legacies and these ways that we can point to this continuum, but there is this major rupture, and that's this kind of two-way participatory convergence around technology.
Yeah, I'll just add one other thing to the excellent thing that Anna was saying, in that when I finished cyber racism in 2009, there wasn't actually a tremendous amount of literature, just speaking about the sociology literature on social movements, that spoke to this stuff happened online, and then people went in the streets. There was like 2 or 3 articles, and a lot of them were outside the United States. There really wasn't a lot of information on that. So I would just say that, it's an excellent question that you raised, and in a lot of ways, we're right at the beginning of trying to understand what's new about this, what's different about it, and how it shapes action in the street. There's a lot more now. I mean, just in the past 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot more, and especially around the Jasmine Revolution. My colleague who's now at UNC, Zainab Tufekci, who's on Twitter as TechSoch. I always have to think of her actual name. It's like TechSoch writes about this. And she's been excellent on that and has written about sort of like what's the social media part of this, and this organizing was going on years before that, and how does this blow up in ways that are different.
Oh, and just one other thing, as you were talking, you reminded me of something else. I love these internet memes that are going around, right? And there's this one from the Olympics, the Michaela is, hey, oh my gosh, I didn't. Michaela is not impressed. Have you guys seen that? I mean, that thing it's still going. You guys, it's like the Olympics have been over for a while. And that's one of the really, I think, clear examples of what's kind of new about this technologies. So I didn't realize that there was this Spock is not impressed. That was the original thing, right? And so this one guy, some guy who does programming decides that he's going to take that image of Michaela, who's upset about her silver medal, and it becomes, so everybody is like uploading stuff, right? And just creating their own mashups and it's just. it just went viral, and it was just so much fun. And it's one of the things that I really enjoy. You got those crazy moments of just people from all over the world just like uploading, something to this, because they want to share, their participation, in a kind of, au courant moment, in the society. So, but yeah, that's different, and it's instantaneous.
Okay, so one more question. I think we had to, well, we have to do two then, because there was very patiently. So we'll end with you, Tanisha, if that's okay.
But Kayla's not impressed. I love that.
I'm Kelsey. I had a question for Professor Everett. You've written about the idea of digital minstrelsy in relation to depictions of black male game characters. And I was hoping to ask if you think there's a connection to or an extension of this issue when it comes to black female characters, and how this might impact the proliferation of racism in video games.
Nice question. This idea of the minstrelsy and even this idea of black male, sort of hyper-violent, characterizations have been so disturbing, and on the one hand not surprising, because again they have their roots in hood films of the 90s, right? And so what's happening online is that social script has been imported into video games to both troubling and sort of I think hopeful effect. For example, when I do some of when I look at the comments on blogs, you'll see a person who identifies as black saying, I don't want to play as a black character. I want to play as, the main character. So I don't want to be a black character in these video games. So I don't think people should be bringing up race, either. And so that to me is kind of hopeful. Because it shows then that people are trying to sort of break out of these racial constrictions that they're put into. But on the other hand, it troubles me too because of sociological studies that showed that black kids, when they were offered, this was like in the 30s, I think.
Kenneth Clark.
40s, yeah. The black kids didn't want to play with black dolls because they were devalued, and they wanted to play with white dolls. And so there was this whole, kind of idea about the psychology, and it helped lead to the Brown v. Board of Education. But at any rate, so you see that there are some ways in which there are people who are comfortable playing, games as a different gender or a different race. But as far as the women are concerned, because they have been so marginal and so invisible practically, except as victims in video games, that right now I think that there is some potential for some hope. And one of the things that bothers me about the Assassin's Creed Liberation is them releasing it on the handheld device, sort of making it a self-fulfilling prophecy that it's not really going to be successful to release as a major console game. And so so there's some hope, but at the same time there's always this kind of hedging against spectacular failure. But one of the things that I think is really important is that for the tech industry, they know that it takes spectacular failures to get to these successes. So why is there this unwillingness in this case to step out there, since you're stepping out there anyway with this character, even though she's put way back in the past, and is a kind of female Toussaint Louverture, but I mean, it's still, it's a step, right? So I mean, I'm hopeful, and on the other hand, I'm always like, you could do better than that. Come on, right? So it does allow us an opportunity to kind of think beyond some of the limits. But yeah, I mean, it's problematic, but there's a little bit of pushback, so.
All right.
Anyway, thanks for the question. I hope I answered it.
Thank you.
Quite sure.
All right, so last question.
Thank you all. Thank you both for your contributions to the discussion. My question is a pedagogical one, because when we think about this new media or digital media, how do we bring this into the classroom? And one of the things you said, Dr. Everett, really struck me, and it was about the YouTube videos, about black hair, and how this becomes like a forum for women to talk about their hair issues. And I teach classes on beauty culture and fashion, and it's central to my discussions of the Black Power movement, the rise of the Afro and black hair care, natural hair care products. So how would you suggest incorporating YouTube videos to talk about this historical trajectory of how black women have used media to have these discussions about hair care?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and I thank you for it. One of the things that I found in teaching a class from, I think it was from TV to the digital, I started to talking with my students about, the ways in which YouTube has enabled people to, to have a voice in ways that they didn't have before. And there's something about the kind of confessional culture that is a result of talk shows and that kind of thing, where people just don't mind saying anything and just putting all their business out there, right? But there is this thing about sharing and the DIY culture on the web that Black women are participating in, is that they found a way to it's community again, this community of practice idea. So they found a way to kind of talk to one another and not, only have to wait for, or it's beyond the kind of, Jet magazine, the Essence or whatever, but it's a way in which they can self-publish and they can kind of talk about whatever they want, right? And so I think on the one hand, there is a way in which it becomes empowering for people who seek out, their a community that is shared, but they're also monetizing this thing now. It's not only about just, well, I want to share something because, they're saying subscribe to my channel because hair companies are coming to them and, having them run their ads and stuff. So, so there's an entrepreneurial aspect to it as well. And, there's the ham, kind of thing, I'm willing to be out there and, and just talk about whatever and share whatever. But it's really interesting. There's this one called My Beauty Mark. She's a woman who, you can see over the 3 years where she cut off all her hair when she had that Brazilian blowout kit, and now she teaches you how to do, what does she call it? Heat training, so, and it's like, it's amazing. I spent like 3 days straight watching her videos. It was just captivating. So, and it's ways in which, these people have just become very comfortable being public, public organic intellectuals. And I don't know what to say about it. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it is interesting.
I know this was for Professor Everett, but I'll just jump in. I've written actually a little bit about this. My students have used YouTube in their, in learning to do activism and used it in an event. So I use a lot of digital video in my classes, and my goal with classes is not so much getting students to bring in YouTube or to show students in YouTube, but to get them to a point where they're creating their own YouTube videos. So I'm doing a lot of that in a class I'm teaching now on feminism, new media, and health, where they have to, and they just did a round of videos that I have to watch on, I get to watch on, if you were to create your own women's clinic, what would that look like? So that's the way that I'm incorporating it in that. So I'm happy to share the link with you if you want. So, and the link to the article's on my site.
Oh yeah, that brings me to the one point. One of the things that I've done in my video games class and now in all my seminars is I offer the students a chance to either write a regular term paper or they can write a smart paper, meaning they can do a blog or they can do a machinima or they can do a YouTube video or they can do a documentary. And that way they're engaging with the media and they become these prosumers, producers and consumers of media, which they are anyway. So. But yeah, that's one of the things that I've been doing for about 6 years now.
Yeah, and I guess I will add just in closing that I do some of the same things, but I think what we'll be surprised by is that our students aren't as tech savvy as we think. That's sort of a way to kind of put a conclusion on this great and stimulating conversation, that they're familiar with certain technologies, but as far as being producers, until they do that work in class, they don't often have the experience of doing it. I guess we have to put a wrap on this now because our esteemed presenters have had a long day. And tomorrow at the faculty seminar, we have a chance to have even more engaged conversation around the readings that we've had circulated. Do you know the location? We might want to announce just while we have people here to remind you to come to the workshop.
Okay. I also want to thank both Professor Everett and Professor Daniels for a wonderful, stimulating conversation. And I really love the opportunity. I love to see both of you conversing with one another because I think it's a great way to model for our students as well, to really listen to one another. So thank you. Just some logistical, and this might not pertain to some of you, but those of you who are in the new media faculty seminar, we're meeting tomorrow at 1 at the 5 College Women's Studies Research Center, which is on the Mount Holyoke campus, 83 College Street. And there will be some lunch. And those of you who are going to dinner, maybe we can gather back here, because I don't know either where the place is, but I know there are people here who do know. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again at our next event, couple of events, October 19th. We'll continue with our colloquium, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you, Treya, Andre.
That's fantastic. Oh my gosh, you must. Yeah. I know. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. Don't worry about it.